Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
Tonight we're going to start a short, and I don't want to minimize this, let's not say short, a series of discussions that we want to have about a topic that is, in all honesty, Jason and I have talked about this, long overdue within our own podcast. And it had been and has been long overdue, and we're still seeing this change, and that's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As we know, for those that are our age growing up, RPGs, most RPGs that existed back then that we knew about were the domain of people who look like Jason and I, white guys. Young, middle-aged, whatever, mostly younger at the time because the games were still relatively new. The challenge here is it was a very, as much as we joke about being nerds playing the games and all that, it was an exclusive group. It was an exclusive game. You had to fit a mold, for lack of a better term, to really belong or to be allowed to play. And only in some of the most, in the recent, very recent years, have we started to see that change. And we're going to have a special guest next week talk about this with us, who I think has I think we both do, has a very unique, very important perspective.
Very informed.
And very informed perspective on this. So that will be interesting. So stick with us for next week. But today we wanted to start the conversation about this, about DEI. And Jason, one of the things that I know you've mentioned this multiple times in our discussions here. So I'm glad that we're both glad that we're taking the time. And that is, you've said that we have seen, especially from Wizards and Dungeons, not that the other groups haven't, a distinct movement towards ensuring or continuing to work on, gaming in the context of DEI. So
yeah, I think that's true, Brad. I think we were talking just before we started recording, and so there I think there are several places we want to go in this episode, but I think to start off from your cue, let's talk about Wizards for a moment. Let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons, not exclusively, but as a start, because I think it's fair to say you and I see them as really being leaders of the pack when it comes to really trying to welcome everyone to the table. Now, you and I have been talking about this, and we've used that concept from the very beginning of the podcast, right back in our original episodes, that one of the things we think is so beautiful about role-playing is that, we're world building, and that means we can create worlds where everyone is invited and where everyone should have a place at the table. Now, we might not be able to make that so everywhere in real life, but of course we can when we're GMing, when we're playing. I think that, as you and I have discussed in the past, really for a long time, it's just finally making it now to the podcast. D&D has done some really neat things, and I guess I'll just leave it with, I think with every book that comes out these days, and I'm not going to say too much more about that for my own reasons and next week's episode, but because we're going to say a lot more about it. But I think that for every book that comes out, we see a more informed effort to represent a broader cut of humanity in the game and thereby bring more people into the game. I think eventually I'd like to talk about various franchises with you tonight, because you and I've talked about this off air, and some just are getting this and some less so. But when it comes to trying to represent across race, ethnicity, belief, gender, creed, etc., Wizards is certainly out in front.
Yeah, and with the advent of at first YouTube, now Twitch, Geek and Sundry, these gaming, what's the best way to put this?
Well, they're visible.
Yeah, gaming central in some way for or another.
Yeah. You're
starting to see that idea of inclusion.
Literally starting to see it.
Yeah, that's my point is that when I watched it, I went in with, again, something that we're talking about here, some preconceived notions.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it would be generational. I thought our generation would be less apt to do this than the younger generations, just based off of what I see with the younger generations having kids and such. I was wrong there.
Yeah.
It is not a generational difference, although one could argue that our generation, Gen X, didn't do enough. We had an opportunity and we didn't.
Oh, without question.
But you do see people from our generation who have embraced this idea. It's becoming more and more with every generation. It's becoming more and more the norm. And we have Gen Z, which is where our children lie.
Yep.
And just for the sake of this argument, I saw a commercial today that the generation after our kids, they've unofficially named it Generation 1 because it will be the first generation that will be completely free of fossil fuel. That's the goal.
Interesting.
So it was a commercial and they self-described it as Generation 1.
Optimistic.
Yeah. But so in the context, I'm just in the sake of the context for this discussion, if I mention it, that's what I'm looking at. I'm in effect talking about my kids.
Right. Well, and I've told my daughters that when they're 30, it's their choice. They can date if they want to. So that buys us some time before we have to interact with Generation 1.
Wow, in this case, you are much more conservative than I have, because I told my daughter that as soon as we walk on the moon again with a pink hippo, then she could start dating. So
that's going to be close. It's going to be close.
Yeah, I don't know, but
SLS and Artemis going to be back to the moon before 2030.
But I told her that the astronaut has to carry a hippopotamus with him.
We've seen stranger things.
And I didn't designate whether it was a stuffed toy or an actual animal.
Yeah. Smart.
So okay, moving on. But point is that it's becoming much more visual. And I know I'm gonna leave this part to you to talk about, but whether you're watching more A-list actors, A-list personalities who are playing.
Yep.
And you saw that happen. You really saw that happen if you started to watch this stuff during the pandemic.
Right.
Or you watch Twitch and there's any number of broadcasts going on at any time, whether you want to watch a recording or live, of these diverse. And there will be, there are all women games going on. There are games that include every possible, mix of race and gender, orientation, whatever. You look at it and you like to believe, if you're sitting at the table, that you're not thinking about that. You're escaping, in effect, the struggles and troubles of reality, and you're playing in a world, and you're playing maybe even something that's uncomfortable in some ways. So I could go off on a tangent, but I'm going to hold on that for a minute.
No, I think you're right. I think that's the beauty in it. And it's a really good point. And you've been talking to me about this for a while, just these past few weeks of watching these streams. Because you see it in wrong word. You hear it in podcasts too, right? We are definitely seeing a diversification of people producing RPG related content. And that's just really cool. Now, before we jump into anything more, we should probably just lay out some definitions, real loose, just working definitions for our our listeners and for ourselves. So Brad and I keep talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The reality is that's what it's being called right now. So let's just talk about that. Just really just functional working definitions. So diversity. This is simply the notion that people come from different walks of life, have different experiences, different proclivities, different interests, etc. Equity. Equity then moves past diversity. Equity is the notion that we work to get people to the same place. Equity is not quite the same thing as equality. Equality is the notion that everyone should be treated equally. That's awesome, except that we know in real life societies that often is insufficient. So equity is the issue of actively making space for people who have been historically disenfranchised. And then inclusion, I see it as more a goal than anything, that when society or a business or a gaming table is truly inclusive, that means it's gotten to the point where everyone at the table truly feels included. They feel on par with everyone else, that voices are different and that's a positive, not something to be overcome. So just from Brad and me, our 2.5 minute crash course in DEI. And so Brad, should we just I mean, this is where we have to go. Should we just talk about our impressions of some of the major outlets and franchises and how they seem to be doing good, bad, and ugly?
Yeah, I think, I think you kind of want to hold off, it sounded to me, on Wizards. I think we could talk very generally and quickly about that.
Yeah.
But I think we can go to some of these other franchises and just get a vibe for it. Obviously, the ones that are in current publishing mode, from our understanding, the big guns.
Right. And let's preface by saying, at least to our knowledge, all of the major franchises and all the major games are clearly making efforts, right? Have come out and not just said the right things, but have made efforts, obvious efforts, to welcome people to the table, to really move past it. And yes, let's maybe keep D&D, Wizards, let's keep them kind of as a litmus test, right? Like they're the goal, just because, like, if you go to their blog or whatnot, they're actively writing and talking about this. Okay. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind, I'm just going to call out the one that I think is doing most poorly with it. And I'm curious what you think about this, Brad. And push back, because maybe I'm being unfair. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, when you think of D&D and you ask, what's the next closest game? Obviously, right, it's Teletubbies. No, obviously it's Pathfinder. Right? There's a blast from the past.
Yeah, you threw me for a loop there, but right. Keep going.
Right. But it's Pathfinder. Obviously based on D&D 3.5. I think Pathfinder has come out, and Paizo has come out and said a number of really positive things. However, what really concerns me is the artwork. Now, I'm the first to admit that I'm not big into fantasy artwork. I've never been. But especially as the father of daughters, a lot of Paizo artwork I still find to be overly sexualized, especially of women.
Yeah, I've never been to me, I never felt there to be a point to overly sexualize or make artwork in some of these books, borderline pornographic. And I don't want to sound like a prude, but that's what it is. I see them working on that less, Paizo.
Yeah.
And maybe this is where you're going, or that's have right. gone. I don't see them making as concerted an effort to look at that. Now we shall see as more second edition material comes out.
Yeah, because second edition is definitely better.
Yes. And we talked about this. We may not have even talked about it on air, quote, but
Mhm.
it's something you brought up, and the litmus test you brought up is the fantastic one that I use now with mine. And that is, with my daughter, would I want her looking at this? Would I
Right.
want her reading this book
Right.
and coming out of it, one, not feeling like, she looks forward to a lifetime of being objectified,
Exactly. Hmm.
and I can think of, I'm not quite there yet or comfortable
Hmm.
yet. If I were to leave out or give her, if she wanted to play, um, definitely not first edition. There's just,
Definitely not right. Exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the writing is fine.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah,
just the
yeah,
it's the imagery.
yeah.
Yes.
But I think the imagery comes from, the I want to be very careful because I don't want to I'm not trying to attack anyone, but
No.
what's the best way to put this? Where does the imagery come from? It comes from locations, people, areas where that is acceptable,
Mhm.
right? So, it's been acceptable in this world, in the game of the world of RPGs,
Right.
to objectify and sexualize
Well, I mean,
women.
all
You
without
know?
all the way back to the earliest artwork for the earliest issues of D&D, right? The hand drawn, line pencil stuff that was in the early manuals. I mean,
Mhm.
come on, let's call it what it is. These were created by young guys who are playing D&D. I don't want to fall into too much of a cliche, but shocking that they would draw scantily clad women,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's a reality, but I think whereas D&D has really actively moved away from that. Not they're not perfect by any means, but they've actively moved away from that. The Paizo art concerns me. And that's
You
just
know,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, it may be more a rhetorical question than anything. Obviously, Wizards has licenses in multiple worlds. They also, they carry Magic, which is
Right.
obviously
Right.
a card game. So you could talk about, that's really an artwork driven
Yeah. Right.
game in many ways.
Right.
It's the art of the card, and obviously I don't play it, but I know
No.
there's the actionable ability of the card, but the art, right, is
Right.
forefront versus
Yeah, that's
a
a good point.
manual.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Wizards, because of their footprint in this world, and maybe we'll get some more information on this down the road. I think they have more of a stake, just because of, if you think about it, these collectible card games, whether it's Magic or
Yeah.
Pokemon or
Right.
whatever.
With a lot of kids and adolescents,
Yeah.
young men and women and others playing these card games.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
but if you look at like a Paizo, they don't necessarily have
Yeah,
as much capital out there beyond Pathfinder,
right.
And derivatives.
Right.
So, but if you look at the miniatures and pawns that they put out there, there's still
Mm-hmm.
there's still some issues I think they should
Yeah.
probably take a look at. And I think
Right.
the argument is always, can one go too far with this or not? And
One can go too far with anything, right? That's not the point.
well, I don't think if you're doing the right thing, can you go too far doing the right thing? And now I'd get philosophical.
No, I think because you're right, Brett. And by too far, I mean it doesn't mean too far. What to me is it doesn't mean we can't recognize and celebrate differences.
Yeah.
Right. That too far is when no, we don't want to do any of that. And I think that's what some people are especially poorly informed people are afraid of. And it's like, no, that's not the point. Now, a counterpoint to all this, when you were talking, I was going to say, sci-fi has always been better about this than fantasy. But as soon as I said that in my mind, I realized that is just grossly untrue. Right. You look at the 40s, 50s sci-fi imagery.
Watch the original series with the outfits.
Right. Okay. So let's do Star Wars first.
But before you go, just
Okay.
if you don't, I go back to my favorite Star Trek series, DS9.
Yep.
When the Trouble with Tribbles episode.
Yep.
When they go back in time, and Dax is dressed in
like the Uhura outfit.
Yeah, and the Uhura outfit, and she's I don't remember what she said. She's like, "Oh, we such classic outfits and all that," but they made a point of kind of stressing that. And that's something, obviously, they were stretching bounds all over the place in that series. But they distinctly made a comment about it. Sci-fi, going back, I'll let you go then with Star Wars.
No, you're right.
Sci-fi didn't really start, even with the original motion picture with, is it Ilea?
Yes, very good. Yeah.
You know, so she came on as a science officer, but she was really written in as a love interest for
Decker,
the Decker character,
right? Yeah,
and not as a major protagonist.
And she was I think she wasn't the actor a supermodel?
Yes, yeah,
right. And okay, so Star Trek has, like everything else, right? From that era, I mean, Star Trek has, I think, at least in retrospect, has always struggled with this issue. It's okay, you know what? And maybe that's not fair. In retrospect, they've struggled. Is it fair to judge something in the past through the eyes of the modern current? I don't know. I just don't know. But like, you think of the original episode of Trek from the very beginning, not the pilot, okay, not the cage, although that's sexualized, but to the extent of hyper traditional gender roles, and not much past that.
But remember, they did the cage,
but then so I'm talking about the man trap,
right? But I'm just saying, if you look at the cage, you had Majel Barrett, who ended up marrying Gene Roddenberry,
right? But
she was number one,
which was so right. That's the point, right? On the one hand, I mean, it's huge, and then you have the yeoman, who was a woman. I mean, it was okay. So the man trap, then you've got the yeoman, who is a woman. But I mean, my God, the name of the first episode is called The Man Trap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so bad. But like you're saying, it was they've struggled with it. I mean, Kirk did a lot more than exploring planets and stars in his 5-year mission.
Oh, he was obviously a dashing swashbuckler type in that
there
show.
Must be little Kirks all over the galaxy.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh
yeah. I mean, no doubt about it.
Yeah. And not just David Marcus. There were
lots of little Kirks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But now you look at Trek. Okay, so now we have, so as of this recording, we have Picard, we have a Discovery, which has not, as we're recording now, season 4 has not yet dropped. By the time this episode is out, season 4 will have dropped. You've got Lower Decks season 2, which just wrapped, and you have Prodigy, which just came out. Now, look at what Star Trek under Kurtzman and the others are trying to do. They are actively diversifying, right? There's major DEI, right? They're really trying to represent all different walks of life, and they're doing it, I think, pretty successfully without objectifying based on any of these personal characteristics. Not 100%, right? But better than we've ever seen before. Even little things that aren't so little, like if you look at Star Trek Picard, remember 7 of 9 from Voyager? Like,
yeah, that was right. And if you look at, if Jerry Ryan's a brilliant woman, and obviously
excellent
they really
actor.
did excellent actor.
Yeah.
They had no need to do to her costume
would
her
a
that
Borg
way.
Drone need such large breasts?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I was gonna try to
let's call it what it is. She was in a cat suit.
Yeah,
right. I mean, which by the way required like an hour or 2 to get into and out of. So she would dehydrate so that she wouldn't have to pee during the workday.
Yeah.
Right. And then she was in heels on top of that. Right.
And now she plays on Picard.
And how she dressed on Picard. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
Right?
And she's
she's in baggy sweatshirts and whatnot.
That's what caught my attention. Not to make this about me, but when when I started watching Picard and they showed her in a teaser for it, and then when they started showing her, I'm like, okay, thank goodness they're playing her more like a human. And I thought, Well, that's really yes and no. You know what they're doing? They're playing her like a human with what she can wear. You know,
Right.
they've stopped objectifying
They
her.
stopped objectifying her. That's right. And then like you look at, I look at how Soji dressed and Dodge, and it wasn't overly objectifying, even with all of the synths on the planet, on Corellius. Uh yeah, they were all wearing slightly revealing clothing, but the point is they were all wearing, right? They really, there
Yes.
was real balance, and there was a mix of colors and appearances and gender, and it's changing. Okay, and then we can slide over to Star Wars, which I think, as because I want to come back to Trek in a moment and Star Wars, but Star Wars has never ever made an effort with any of this. I mean, I was too young. We were too young when Return of the Jedi came out.
No, you might have been too young, but it was noticeable even back then that the dancer in Jabba's palace or Princess Leia's outfit.
I was going Princess, yeah, yes, that they were
Yeah.
scantily clad, but I don't think at that young age I realized just how revealing all of that was. Like
Yeah,
in
I mean,
like
yeah.
in retrospect, looking back,
Yeah.
like as an adult or even like a teenager, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
that that was not necessary.
And not only that, go back and watch if you go back to the original release, because you remember now Lucas released it like 6 times, right? Including
Right.
including one that was 3D.
Oh God,
One of the releases,
hard pass.
yeah, one of the releases when they changed the band in,
Oh yeah, when they
okay,
with the digitization. Yep.
yes, with Cy Snoodles was
Yep.
the name.
Gesundheit. Yep.
Yeah, yep. They in
Oh
effect, if you
yeah.
watch her,
Yeah.
she's objectified
Oh,
as
big
an
time.
alien,
Yes.
and then there are backup singers.
And they're even worse.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So they
No,
they
you're absolutely right.
literally went in one of the re-releases
And made it worse.
and made it worse.
Yeah, I mean, that there's a reality there. The whole Star Wars franchise, there's never been an effort, not, and maybe that's not fair, at least it hasn't been successful. It's like even the most recent Star Wars movies, so the sequels, the sequel era, at least that got better. I mean, it definitely got better, but Star Wars has never particularly handled at all issues of race,
Well,
gender, orientation. I mean, Star Wars, even, I mean, yeah, you have Finn, outstanding. And I mean, he's a great actor too. I mean, I love the character, but it's still a super white movie. All three of them.
yeah, they threw in Rise of Skywalker, another stormtrooper group that rebelled.
Right.
And
there's some diversity, but
yeah,
it comes across to me almost as tokenization, which is a little
even
uncomfortable.
at the end there was in Star Wars the first kiss between two women, and they made some announcement about this.
They made a big deal of it. I missed it the first time I saw the movie because it was so insignificant.
It literally was probably 2 seconds.
Not even, and it was in the background.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And if you didn't know now, listening to us,
right,
and you watched the movie, you probably wouldn't even have known.
No, like I said, I knew it was coming. I missed it, seeing it in the theater, because it's such a busy scene, and it just wasn't very significant. Okay, so we're being awfully harsh, but the reality is, if we focus more specifically, everybody, on the RPG materials, Star Wars really from the get-go with West End Games and the good old D6 system really wasn't bad. I'm not saying it was all that enlightened, but at least when it came to gender, I don't think there was a lot of objectification in the books. I think the Fantasy Flight material, there's even less. It's not great, but it's better. And there's also clearly diversification of race, at least to start. It's not great, but it's there and it's better. Star Trek, not surprisingly, I think, in the Modiphius material and whatnot, does a much, much better job of that. But again, that was always Star Trek's thing. And Star Trek has always looked at issues such as racial diversity, not merely through Earth, but through human racial issues, but through looking at the many, many different species, like the new Federation president in the 32nd century on Discovery having a human Bajoran Cardassian background, right? They've always used that to challenge the status quo.
They did that even, again, I keep going back to DS9. Obviously, Dax had the first online kiss with a woman.
And I just saw, as we record, that episode dropped just a few days ago, way back when.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. See? And I know that Ira Stephen Bear talked about that in the documentary they did on DS9, and I cannot remember it. You actually,
yes.
So,
but let's not forget, if I may, that DS9 had a black captain.
Yeah.
I mean, huge, right? I mean, brilliant actor, wonderful voice, but I mean, my God, and huge. And yet we know from what Avery Brooks has written and has interviewed that there was a real struggle there. That, you look at how Captain Sisko looked in season 1.
Oh, you're beating me to it. Yes.
Okay, sorry. No, go ahead. Go do it.
No. You hit it on the head because remember now he had recently come off. Obviously, he is a Shakespearean trained actor. He teaches even to this day. He's a professor of theater. The man is brilliant. But he was also he was my favorite character on Spencer for Hire.
Yeah,
and then he had his own show, A Man Called Hawk, I think is what it was called. And so when he took this part on DS9, they I don't know if it was required or mandated or highly recommended, he shave his facial hair.
He wasn't given a choice.
Yeah, okay.
He had to be clean shaven. He had to have the head of hair. I'm trying to say tactfully, they wanted him to look very, very white.
Yeah, they wanted him to be, or they wanted him to be cliche.
Yeah.
And they tried to spin it, if I remember correctly, they tried to spin it off as by doing that, he would look more fatherly to Jake.
Right.
Versus what you see of him, which in all honesty, what you see of what Captain Sisko looks like in season 6 and 7, especially, looks more natural.
Oh, yeah.
To him.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is if you really watch it and you can get past, and I've watched this so many times, so I don't really think about it.
Right.
Get past the differences. That's why he is, you and I have these debates about who their favorite captain is. For me, it's always been Sisko. And not for any particular reason. I love the character. I've loved Avery Brooks as an actor going back to a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they did that. And even the episodes where Quark and Grilka she had to defend her house.
Yep.
And she had to marry him in order to defend her house, but then was given leadership as a female over her house.
Mm-hmm. When Moogie became the Grand Nagus.
Yeah.
Right. And Ferengi women weren't even allowed to wear clothing. Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it's these are
on the flip side, you have Chase Masterson who played Rom's wife.
Okay. So the whole point, right? There are double girls, right? Again, we're not saying Trek has always gone this right,
but they played that off. Granted, they didn't have to have him on at all, but they made it abundantly clear that Ferengi liked to objectify.
Right. And then those same women unionized.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so before this becomes, dice in mind on Star Trek, which, let's face it, is always a possibility. But to bring it back, everybody, to games. So the question then becomes for us, well, how is all of this manifesting? How is this growth and change manifesting in the games? As we've said, some of the games are getting better. D&D from Wizards, definitely changing. Star Trek, the across its publishers, at least West End, because I'm not overly familiar. I know we gave Unicorn a hard time, deservedly so, but West End, Fantasy Flight, yay, the new Edge studio, the the diversity is so much greater. The lack of objectification and tokenization is so much better, but in the books it was never really bad. Say, not now with Star Trek, not with Star Wars. With Star Trek, kind of the same thing. And then you have others that aren't so great, and it's difficult to see where the future will go. I look at my bookshelf right now, Brad, and I look at like the Genesis core rule book, right? You look at kind of the future of where things are going, and there we see a clear attempt.
Well, you and I both looked.
Yeah,
you and I both did. And obviously we've always been interested. It wasn't the podcast that drove us to this, and I will admittedly say that I was probably a little later to the game than others, and it's because of my friendship with Jason and his brother and others in the group. I was able to mature in that area. Not like it happened yesterday, but I was a little later to the game. But you have this situation where, and this is more a rhetorical question, maybe you have a thought on it. Does fantasy / sci fantasy like Starfighter, does that sit more, did they objectify more than they did in sci-fi? And I would argue yes.
I think so.
Yeah. And that's, again, personal opinion.
Yeah. So here's where I get stuck, and I get stuck in that I question, okay, what do we do with this, and is this the way to test it? So in all of the major RPGs, there's the issue of either race or species. Right. And Starfighter is a good example because it's got space goblins. I don't get it, but it's got space goblins. And it's one thing to say, okay, well, this species or race, and in the games when they say race, they mean species, right? A race of elves. Okay, a species of elves. So, elves tend to be slighter and grayer haired, and dwarves tend to be shorter and bulkier, and then it gets a little iffy.
I would argue that elves have always come across effeminate. Dwarves have come across as hyper masculine,
but then they also like gold. They have the potential to be very greedy. It's like, okay, hold on, something's happening here. And then you get to things like orcs. Well, they're just mean and stupid as a species, okay? And then goblins. Well, they're manipulative, and it's such, and you'll see where we're going with this. And it's one thing to say, okay, on average, this species is taller or bulkier or passes more gas. Okay, those things may all be true, right? But then when you start to describe these species as having these personality characteristics that are always negative and real kind of tropes, it's like, okay, that kind of makes me uncomfortable. As a kid, I didn't, like you said, Red, as a kid, I didn't know any better, right? I wasn't exposed to anything, but there weren't any of these discussions going on when I was a kid. Certainly not where I was born and raised, but now it's like, well, don't we need to rethink that? Why should, and maybe this is extreme, guys, but why should it be okay that an entire fictional species is greedy or evil or beady-eyed or whatever? right? This is an old way of thinking. And to me, the real litmus test comes or will come in the future when we can look at an RPG, new or old, and not find that, not see that there aren't any groups that are predictably objectified.
Yeah, inherently evil. I know they did it with orcs and half orcs. You bring that up. This idea, orcs were inherently evil. Now you can play as a PC. You could play an orc or a half orc. You can choose the alignment.
You can play a goblin now, can't you?
Yeah.
Right.
You can choose the alignment. You aren't tied to an alignment based off of
good point.
There isn't an archetype for them.
Right.
That's something you see, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I cannot tell you. A little embarrassed, but I cannot tell you if that's truly the case on the Pathfinder side. But I know it's true on the Wizard side.
I don't know offhand either, though. I do believe that with 2E, just like with Dungeons and Dragons 5e, we definitely see a lot of this attempt to diversify and recognize that you just shouldn't be doing that to any species, fictional or not. And I think you see the start of that in 2E with Pathfinder 2. I really think that's changing.
Obviously there are races or species that may have had historical alignments, but the human race within these games, you were always given a choice. When you create your character, you chose your alignment,
right?
And you really want to play. Alignment isn't something you put on paper. If you're truly playing the game right, you want to play your character to that alignment, not based off of rules, but just based off of creativity. Well,
right.
There were species / races.
Didn't have a choice.
Yeah, like dark elves.
Right.
So, if people wanted to play that character, or even like a necromancer, even if you wanted to play a necromancer character. So now, and it's funny you bring that up, because I don't think this was the light bulb for me, embarrassingly enough, again, when we started talking about this a long time ago, was that I never put it together that, when you went to play this game, when you open the book, play it, you would determine, your alignment might have been predetermined for you based off of the character type you created.
Yes.
So, and you're seeing that distinctly, you're distinctly seeing that move away in the Wizards world. And ultimately I have a new book coming in from them, the Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, that will be coming in probably by the time that our next episode drops. I'll be interested to see how they discuss dragons in this context, or if it needs to even come up at all.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yep.
So, and it might be worth, if time permits, and if we might be worth a question to ask in the future, if we were to happen to talk to anyone who would have contact over there in one form or another.
Right.
And
you never know.
On. Yeah, you never know.
Right.
You never know. Monotone guessing.
Right.
So,
right. Odd. The future is difficult to see. Yes.
Yeah.
So clearly we haven't solved any of the problems here, but
I
we
think
wanted to start
talking
about it. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have talked about making sure that we make this a natural part of the discussion. We don't force it, because we shouldn't have to. But we want to make sure that it becomes a natural part of the discussion. And I'll be quite honest with you, you're better at doing that than I am. And it's not, and I think it's mostly for me, it's just, I don't think to have that conversation sometimes.
And that's, I mean, that's okay. I just, because of what I do and where I do it, I find myself in these discussions regularly.
Bingo. And that's what I'm saying is that you have helped me to introduce that into my mindset, because you work in a world where the discussions come up. I don't work in a racist world or anything like that. I just work in a world where the stuff being done is it just doesn't have a bearing. Consumers, we are selling to all consumers.
Devil's advocate.
Yeah.
It absolutely has a bearing.
No.
It just doesn't come up.
Yeah, it has a bearing in terms of how I treat, how we work as an organization, how we treat.
Right.
But what I'm saying, and we're very careful of that. We have a diverse group of people.
Yeah.
That I work with that are phenomenal. This is the best group of people I've ever had a chance to work with. But our discussions are equal, all amongst equals, and they are talking about customers who we do not look at in a consumer is a consumer is a consumer. So what we sell and what we do is software that works on a computer in the world of education, finance, healthcare, whatever.
Right.
I'm just digging myself a hole. Point being, yours is more. I'm just going to stop there. Yours is more pronounced, and really you have helped me to understand it better. So,
yeah, well, that's great. Thanks. As others have done with me. Right.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
So yeah, I'd ask you to edit that other part out, but you may as well just leave it in there and allow them to listen to and laugh at me stumble over my own words and my own circular logic.
And I think that's, but I think that's part of the point for us, Brad, that we're talking about this not to judge. We're talking about this to make a statement and bring a conversation to the table, right? Mm-hmm. Our attitude is unabashedly, there has to be a place for everyone at the table. We are fortunate that we have the privilege, which gives us power to make that happen, right? Being a bunch of white guys, we can say, okay, we're making spaces at the table, and it's going to be that way. Not everyone has that privilege, right? And the more we talk about that, the more it can get done. And like you said earlier, you're seeing this all over. And, you watch way more of all the video content for this stuff, the games and the twitching. And to me, Twitch is still something that tends to accompany a seizure disorder, not like a streaming service. But I know it's really, I know we even technically have a Twitch channel, thanks to you. We just don't do anything with it, right? I'm still impressed that we're on YouTube. But you do see all of this wonderful diversity of humanity GMing and hosting and sitting at the table. And it's really, really cool. And that's something that probably only that visual medium could accomplish as well.
I'll leave you two things. One, I better check if we have a Twitch channel. If we did that, I don't remember doing that, but just so everybody knows, the chance of you seeing any of us on video on a
is
Twitch
less than
video,
zero.
Yeah,
because that's not our shtick.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen.
No. Two, when I run the Twitch channel on my television as an app, at night if I'm reading or doing some work related to gaming or whatnot, and when I look for a game to watch, I look and see what's live.
Sure.
First. And then what I see is like the how long they've been running. Because a lot of times if you can get into a game early, then it's a different experience than if you get into and watch a game that's midstream. But I don't look at who's leading or in the game. You see more and more people DMing that are not your typical Sheldon Coopers or Howard Wolowitz's or Leonard Hofstadter's Big Bang Theory.
Right.
It's still there. You just don't, it's just, and it's still predominant. Don't get me wrong.
But there are alternatives now.
There are. And it's funny now how when I really want to, I can look in and I can see the differences. And the interesting part is when you get those people who are not traditional white males who are DMing, everyone who's gaming there obviously doesn't care and doesn't treat the DM differently, doesn't take the game differently. The DM doesn't treat anybody differently. It doesn't matter who leads the game.
Right.
You know,
Now, if we could just get the rest of the world up to speed with those tables, we'd be set.
well, if everybody played RPGs, maybe we'd get there, right?
And you're making a joke, and yet.
No, I'm not.
And yet, right.
It's a humorous statement, but
Yeah.
Sit down. You know what? If you don't understand what it's like to be something, why don't we role play it? I leave a question for that. I'll leave this question because I think we need to get over to GM, right?
Yeah.
I'll leave this question. Will you play a character, not a one shot, but build up a character? I'm not talking to you. I'm just talking to listeners.
Yeah.
That is very different and outside of your comfort zone, and learn to play that character and commit to that character.
And when you say comfort zone, to be clear, we're talking about not something like, oh, they would vote differently than me. We're talking about race, gender, sexual orientation.
Yeah.
It's something significant.
Yeah.
I think let's not even try to answer that. That is a wonderful challenge for everyone listening. Would you do that? And if your answer is, I don't know, or no, why?
Yeah. And there's no wrong answer. I think I think that should for you be a, it should be a trigger for you to know that you probably need to have some discussions about this.
Right.
Or talk about it, talk it out. I mean, fact is that my views on this have matured by us talking about it over the years off air.
Right.
So all of us can change, as much as we watch society now and it looks dark and bleak these days. I hate to say it, in many different ways for many different reasons. I think there's still hope, because I think there are people out there. They don't draw the attention that the people that are not willing, but I think there are people out there that will do it, and we have to live with that hope. And they're willing to accept and look at what's out of their own character.
Yep. One table at a time.
One table at a time. There you go. How about you? So moving over to
the
GM corner. What have you been reading, watching, discussing? I know Prodigy's coming.
I'm deeply immersed in the whole Star Trek thing right now. I've got a lot of Star Trek on the brain, Brad. I'm not sure how well that has translated to RPG. Honestly, RPG wise, what's been on my mind and what's been on my plate is our ongoing, slowly growing hybrid adventure via our Facebook group.
Yeah.
Right. That's been fun.
And I have found, I think I'll know even more the next time. I am finding how little I really understand the dice mechanic for the Genesis Star Wars system. And what I mean by that is I love the theory behind it. The idea that every decision you make, it could be with its own threat and advantage. And even if you make a decision that is more good than bad, there still could be
some bad.
Yeah. So I love that theory, but I'll tell you what, getting used to how to do it. They call it the dice pool. How you roll your dice pool. Poor Jason gets, he's so used to it. I have to say to him, slow down, hold on. I don't even know what to pick yet. And I'm starting to get there. Because I've noticed it in a couple, but I'm still, I'm betting you'll hear me say it next time, that I'm still learning the dice pool. And I think that's extraordinarily important, as much as us gaming together is. Yeah. Because that's going to help us drive Genesis.
Yep. Agreed. And it's certainly partly my fault, because it didn't occur to me with the game that we're playing with Brian. I dropped you guys in right now. Brian's character is just entering the stage, but I dropped your character into this situation where it's starship combat. Yeah. And that's I didn't realize that's new to you. And it's right. I see how it's fundamentally the same as just good old PC combat roles, but that's because I've done it. And so, I dropped you into this combat situation, and yeah, and it's a learning curve. And before you know it, you may or may not survive it. And if you do, you'll be off the ship and it'll be fine.
Yeah, pretty much. So you'd like, it's going to be one of those torch throwing moments for me.
Yes.
So, okay.
So speaking of heroic moments, and kind of coming back full circle to diversity, equity, and inclusion in RPGs, why don't you queue up next week's episode? Because next week's episode is a big deal.
Yes. So next week, we actually looked to talk with this person even before. This wasn't a result of us looking at someone from a DEI perspective. This was us finding someone who was a fascinating author and gamer,
and had something to say. And then as we moved into this discussion about DEI, it's a perfect fit. So the perfect fit.
Yeah. So next episode, we're going to have Shelley Mazenova on, who works for Wizards of the Coast, author, playwright. Obviously, she does some podcasts, Jason, I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard something like Dragon Talk. I don't know. It's like something official.
Yeah, something like, I think that Wizards does. Or,
right.
Shelley, we joke.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, this is a big deal, and it's going to be a great interview.
Yeah. And so we'll talk with her, obviously, about this topic and anything else that comes up. She's got a fascinating history and an interesting story to tell. And obviously her books are fascinating, but that's going to be coming up in our next episode. So we had Jeff Ashworth on, which was fantastic. We're having Shelley on.
We've got another one lined up. We've got more feelers out, right? Every fifth episode, the zeros and the fives, everyone, we are going to bring you more and more interviews to really, really capture the world of role playing, is with interesting people, writers, and other creatives who are helping to create our worlds or help us play in our worlds, or like next week with Shelley Mazenova, to think more helpfully about our real world.
Yeah. And what episode number is that?
25.
There we go.
Big deal.
Yep.
It's
I don't think anyone figured that we would last this long, but
nope, we didn't.
I'll say this and then you can wrap us up. This has been this is a bad thing to say. This has been as fun for me as gaming has been. Yes. And which is why some of our gaming has lagged a little bit, because we've been doing a lot of recording lately, and every episode is been fun, and I learn. And next week, I suspect we're gonna learn, and I would highly recommend you listen, because I think we all can learn. Continue to learn. So.
Absolutely. Well said. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with us as we rambled, wandered to and fro, probably more than ever before this episode, which is really saying something. But we're trying to do our due diligence. This isn't the only time we're ever going to bring up matters of diversity, matters that matter. We'll also be talking about other things. We've got all kinds of things, as we always do, listed on the docket for future episodes. Next week, going to be a big deal. As always, thanks for being here with us. We wish you well. Stay well and be well. We will see you all, and you'll hear us next week.